You saw the headlines, you heard the rumors, a sudden shift, a new push for peace talks in Ukraine, backed not just by the US, but now by Europe's major powers. For years, the official line was victory first, talks later. Now that's changed. In this video, we're dissecting this monumental pivot. We're going to uncover the real reasons behind this diplomatic U-turn, what it means for Ukraine's future, and how this new strategy aims to secure a lasting peace without surrendering to aggression. By the end, you'll understand the high-stakes game being played and the single critical factor that will determine its success or failure. Stick around, because the story behind the statement is more provocative than you think. For over 3 years, the war in Ukraine has been a brutal grind, a conflict of attrition fought in muddy trenches and shattered cities, consuming lives and resources at a staggering rate. The Western alliance stood firm, arming Ukraine, imposing sanctions on Russia, repeating one core mantra: Ukraine must win on the battlefield. The goal was a just peace, but a peace predicated on Ukrainian strength and Russian defeat. That was the plan. But plans change when reality bites, and the reality is that this war has entered a phase of bloody stalemate. The front lines have barely moved in months. Ukraine's heroic counteroffensives last year made gains, but failed to deliver a decisive breakthrough. Russia, despite immense losses, has mobilized its economy for a long war, digging in deep. This is the unspoken truth that now dictates Western strategy. The belief in a clean, decisive military victory has evaporated. The cost of continuing an indefinite war of attrition is simply too high, both for Ukraine and for its backers. Political fatigue is setting in across Western capitals. War weariness is a real, tangible force, and the bill for sustained military aid is growing, sparking debates in legislatures from Washington to Berlin. The West is tired, but it is not capitulating. This is not a white flag. This is a strategic recalculation, a move from a strategy of pure military victory to one of diplomatic leverage combined with sustained military pressure. Think of it not as giving up, but as changing the game entirely. The catalyst for this shift came from a familiar and often controversial figure, US President Donald Trump. Just this week, he publicly called for both sides to, and I quote, "stop at the lines where they are, the battle lines, and to move forward with a deal." This wasn't a new idea from Trump, but the timing and the context gave it new weight. For years, many in Europe viewed this kind of talk with deep suspicion, fearing it would legitimize Russia's conquests, freezing the conflict and handing Putin a reward for his aggression. The initial reaction from Kiev and some NATO allies was, predictably, one of alarm. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of dismissing Trump's proposal, Europe's most powerful leaders joined him. In a sharply worded joint declaration, the heads of major European nations stood alongside the Ukrainian president and explicitly endorsed Trump's position. They declared their strong support for an immediate stop to the fighting and for using the current line of contact as the starting point for negotiations. Let that sink in. Europe has joined the US push for talks based on the current front line. This is a seismic event in Western diplomacy. It signals that the transatlantic alliance, after months of internal strain, is realigning on a new unified strategy. But here's the crucial part, the nuance that everyone is missing. Europe didn't just sign a blank check. They coupled their support for Trump's proposal with an ironclad reaffirmation of a core principle, that international borders must not be changed by force. This is the delicate and frankly brilliant balancing act at the heart of this new approach. On one hand, you have the pragmatic, some would say realist, push from the US to stop the bleeding and start talking from the current reality on the ground. On the other, you have Europe insisting that any negotiation must begin from a position of strength for Ukraine and must not sacrifice its territorial integrity. The joint statement is a masterclass in diplomatic language. It brands Russia's actions as stalling tactics and boldly states that Ukraine is the only party serious about peace. It emphasizes that Ukraine must be in the strongest possible position and before, during, and after any ceasefire. This isn't a surrender. This is a call to arm Ukraine for the negotiation table as fiercely as we have for the battlefield. The West is essentially telling Putin, we are ready to talk, but not because you've won. We are ready to talk because we are confident we can secure a better deal for Ukraine now. By combining diplomatic pressure with unrelenting military and economic support, this shifts the onus onto Moscow. The world sees the West united for peace. If Russia refuses, it exposes itself as the sole obstacle. But why now? What forced this strategic hand? The answer lies in a cold, hard assessment of the battlefield. Ukraine's forces are dug in, but they are stretched thin. Ammunition shortages, while being addressed, have been a persistent concern. Russian forces, despite being less advanced, have a numerical advantage in manpower and a seemingly endless supply of artillery shells from North Korea and Iran. The front line has become a meat grinder, favoring the side with more bodies to throw into the fight. This is a grim, horrific reality. Western military analysts have quietly concluded that without a massive, unprecedented mobilization and escalation, a step nobody is willing to take, Ukraine is unlikely to achieve a major breakthrough in the near term. Continuing the fight under these conditions risks gradual erosion of Ukrainian positions over time. It's a war of inches, and the cost for every inch is astronomically high. So, the West is choosing to change the terms of engagement. Instead of fighting for every village in a slow, bloody crawl, the idea is to lock in the current territorial picture and then use other means to pressure Russia. This is where the strategy gets really interesting and where I'll show you the economic weapon the West is about to unleash. Keep watching, because the plan for using Russia's own money against it is one of the most aggressive geopolitical moves we've seen in decades. Furthermore, the West is acutely aware of the risks of an endless conflict. Every day the war continues, the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine deepens, millions are displaced, the economy is shattered, and an entire generation is being shaped by violence. There is also the constant looming threat of Russian escalation. Could a desperate Putin, backed into a corner, do something even more reckless? No one knows, and no one wants to find out. Finally, there's the issue of public support in Western countries. The initial unity was powerful, but it's not immune to drift. Political parties skeptical of aid are gaining traction. The "why are we sending all this money abroad" narrative is a potent one in election campaigns. Western leaders are looking at the political calendar and realizing that the window for a coordinated, strong stance might not be open forever. They need to achieve a tangible outcome, a framework for peace, before domestic politics in key nations fractures the alliance. So, this pivot is not a sign of weakness. It is a race against time, a race to secure a durable peace for Ukraine before the political will that sustains it begins to crumble. This is the high-wire act they are attempting, and the next few weeks will be critical. Let's talk about the elephant in the room: trust, or more specifically, the complete and total lack of it between Moscow and the West. Any negotiation, any ceasefire, any peace deal is utterly meaningless without a credible enforcement mechanism. This is the fundamental flaw in every optimistic peace plan we've seen so far. Why would anyone believe a word Vladimir Putin says? His government has broken every major agreement it has made regarding Ukraine, from the Budapest Memorandum to the Minsk agreements. A mere piece of paper with signatures won't protect Ukraine. The West knows this, Ukraine knows this, and this is precisely why the new strategy is so focused on creating facts on the ground that are irreversible with or without Russian cooperation. The goal isn't to get Russia to promise to be good. The goal is to make it impossible for Russia to be bad without facing immediate and devastating consequences. This is where NATO's quiet, long-term play comes into focus. While the headlines are about ceasefire lines and negotiation baselines, behind the scenes, the alliance is working on the most robust security guarantees for Ukraine since the war began. We're not just talking about vague promises, we're talking about a concrete institutionalized framework for arming, training, and supporting the Ukrainian military for decades to come. Think of it as a Marshall Plan meets a mutual defense pact, but with a specific legal nuance to avoid triggering a direct NATO-Russia war. The discussions in London this week under the Coalition of the Willing framework are pivotal here. This group, which includes key nations like the UK, Poland, the Baltics, and others, is likely discussing bilateral security agreements that would legally bind them to long-term military aid for Ukraine. This means a guaranteed flow of weapons, ammunition, intelligence, and training, regardless of the political winds in Washington or other capitals. It's about insulating Ukraine's defense from Western domestic politics, but it goes even deeper. The real enforcement mechanism isn't just what the West gives Ukraine, it's what the West builds inside Ukraine. Plans are undoubtedly being drawn up for the permanent stationing of Western military advisors and trainers on Ukrainian soil, even in a post-ceasefire environment. These personnel would act as a tripwire, a powerful deterrent against any future Russian attempt to break the agreement. Furthermore, the integration of Ukrainian air defense into a broader NATO-controlled network is a very real possibility. Imagine a scenario where Russian jets or missiles approaching Ukrainian airspace are detected not just by Ukrainian radars, but by a joint command center in Poland or Romania, allowing for seamless early warning and potentially even shared targeting data. This would make Ukraine's skies a no-fly zone for Russian aggression without NATO having to officially patrol them. This is the kind of deep structural integration that creates true security. It makes Ukrainian defense inseparable from European defense. And then there's the economic enforcement. The frozen Russian assets are the key. The West's plan isn't just to hand this money to Ukraine in a lump sum. It's far more strategic than that. The most likely model is the creation of a dedicated fund administered by an international body that would drip-feed billions of dollars to Ukraine over many years, specifically tied to two conditions. First, for reconstruction and military procurement, and second, as a form of compensation for the war's damages. But here's the brilliant part. This fund would also act as a permanent sword of Damocles hanging over Moscow's head. Any violation of a future peace deal by Russia, a single troop movement across the line, a cyber attack, anything, would result in an immediate halt to the disbursements and the permanent forfeiture of the remaining funds. The money becomes both the carrot and the stick. It pays for Ukraine's future security, and it financially punishes Russia for any future aggression. This creates a powerful economic incentive for Moscow to actually comply with the terms, something mere diplomatic threats have failed to do. Now let's address the Kremlin's reaction. They've been dismissive. They've refused to commit to the proposed summit and have rejected the idea of freezing the front lines as a baseline. They insist any talks must be on their terms. This is classic Russian negotiation tactics. Reject the initial offer, act offended, and try to seize control of the narrative. But this time it feels different. This time the West isn't coming to them with a desperate plea for peace. They are presenting a unified front backed by a comprehensive strategy that addresses the military, economic, and enforcement realities. Russia's Russia's dismissal isn't a sign of strength, it's a sign of panic. They see the trap being set. They understand that this new Western approach doesn't require Russian goodwill to succeed. It only requires Western unity and patience. The West can continue to arm Ukraine, continue to drain the Russian economy, and continue to seize its assets with or without negotiations. The invitation to talks is, in a way, an off-ramp for Russia, a chance to cut its losses before its position deteriorates further. If they refuse, the slow, painful strangulation of the Russian state will continue. The choice is now Putin's to make, but the West is no longer waiting for him. They are moving forward with or without him. And if you think this is just about Ukraine, wait until you see how this same playbook is being prepared for a much bigger global confrontation. The final part of this story will connect the dots to a looming conflict that threatens to be even larger. What's happening in Ukraine is merely the dress rehearsal. We've arrived at the pivotal moment, the peak of this entire geopolitical realignment. Everything we've discussed, the new negotiation stance, the weaponization of frozen assets, the long-term security guarantees, points to one undeniable conclusion. The war in Ukraine is no longer just a regional conflict. It has become the primary arena for a fundamental restructuring of global power. The West is using this moment not only to defend Ukraine, but to send a message to every autocratic regime and rising power that the rules-based international order, while under strain, is far from dead. It's being reforged in the fires of this war, becoming harder, sharper, and more pragmatic. The principle that borders cannot be changed by force is no longer just a diplomatic phrase in a UN charter. It's a principle being enforced with economic warfare and strategic military planning. This is the new reality of international politics. Might does not make right, but might is now required to enforce what is right. This brings us to the shocking larger context that makes this Ukrainian strategy so urgent for the West. While all eyes are on the front lines in Donbass, another potentially much larger storm is gathering in the Indo-Pacific. The lessons learned from the initial hesitant response to Russia's invasion are being directly applied to a possible contingency involving Taiwan. The slow and fragmented initial sanctions on Russia taught the West a brutal lesson. In a crisis with a major power like China, you must have the playbook written and the alliance solidified before the first shot is fired. What we are witnessing with Ukraine right now is the live fire testing of that new playbook. The rapid freezing of assets, that was a test run. The coordinated export controls to cripple a military-industrial complex, that was a rehearsal. The seamless flow of intelligence and real-time battlefield data to a partner under invasion, that was a training exercise. The West is creating a template for how to confront a larger, more economically integrated adversary. And every element of the new Ukraine strategy is a key part of that template. The long-term security guarantees being crafted for Kiev are a model for the kind of unwavering commitment that would be needed to deter Beijing. The use of Russia's own assets is a precedent that will not be lost on Chinese leadership, who hold trillions in Western reserves. This is the unspoken high-stakes game being played. Ukraine is the current battle, but the West is already preparing for the next war. This realization is what fuels the urgency behind the new diplomatic push. The West needs to stabilize the European front, not out of weakness, but to pivot and focus on the Pacific challenge. A frozen conflict in Ukraine that saps Russian power and serves as a permanent lesson in the cost of aggression is a manageable outcome. An active, draining war that ties down Western resources and attention for years is a strategic disaster in the making. The unified transatlantic response to Ukraine proved that the old alliances still have teeth, but that unity is a precious and finite resource. By moving to a managed long-term containment of Russia in Ukraine, the US and Europe can preserve that unity and redirect their collective strength towards the systemic challenge posed by China. This is the grand strategic calculation happening in Washington, Brussels, and London. They are playing a multidimensional chess game on a global scale, and the move in Ukraine is designed to secure the entire board. So, where does this leave us, the viewers, the citizens of the West? This is where the promise from the beginning of this video is fulfilled. You now understand the real stakes. This isn't just a story about a peace deal, it's a story about the West relearning the art of strategic statecraft. It's about combining raw power with diplomatic finesse. The new approach to Ukraine is a declaration that the era of naive optimism is over, replaced by a clear-eyed realism that understands the world is a dangerous place and that peace is not the absence of conflict but the presence of overwhelming, credible deterrence. The West is finally building that deterrence for the 21st century, and they are starting in the fields of Ukraine. As we reach the final minute, let's be blunt. The common narrative you'll hear is that this is a compromise, a sign of Western fatigue. That is a dangerous and simplistic misunderstanding. What we are seeing is the opposite. It is the strategic maturation of the Western alliance. They have looked into the abyss of a forever war and a rising superpower and have chosen a path of strength and sustainability. They are telling Russia, your invasion has failed to break Ukraine or our unity. Now you can negotiate an end to your strategic catastrophe, or you can watch as your economy is systematically dismantled to pay for the damage you've caused, all while we turn our gaze to an even larger challenge. The ball is in Moscow's court, but the West has already won the strategic initiative. Now here's the question I want you to wrestle with in the comments. Many people argue that talking to an aggressor like Russia is a moral failure, a reward for violence, but after seeing the full scope of this strategy, the frozen assets, the ironclad security guarantees, the global context, do you believe that negotiating from a position of overwhelming strength is a sign of weakness, or is it the ultimate form of smart, realistic power? Is this diplomacy, or is it coercion by other means? I want to hear your take. If you've made it this far, you're part of the minority that doesn't just consume headlines, but digs for the deeper truth. This channel is built for viewers like you. If you want to continue this unflinching analysis, then your next step is simple. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because while 90% of people will see this new Ukraine strategy as a retreat, you now know it's actually the beginning of a much broader, more assertive offensive. The question is, are you going to be on the sidelines, or are you going to be in the room where we figure out what happens next? You've seen the strategy, you understand the global chessboard, but there's one final critical piece that determines whether this entire grand plan succeeds or collapses into a new, more dangerous phase of conflict. It's not a weapon, a sanction, or a diplomatic note. It's the one element that has consistently proven to be the most unpredictable and powerful force in this war. The human spirit, specifically the unwavering will of the Ukrainian people. All the sophisticated statecraft in the world means nothing if the nation at the center of this storm loses the will to fight for its own future. The West can provide all the weapons and money, but it cannot provide the soul. This is the ultimate variable, the final frontier of this conflict, and right now it's the factor that both Kiev and Moscow are desperately trying to measure and influence. Think about the psychological toll. After more than 3 years of relentless war, with cities reduced to rubble, families torn apart, and a constant backdrop of loss and trauma, how much can a society endure? The Ukrainian government and its Western partners are acutely aware of this. The new diplomatic push is, in part, a response to this very human reality. It's an attempt to offer a tangible horizon of hope, a political process that leads to a definitive end, not an endless tunnel of sacrifice. The message to the Ukrainian soldier in a muddy trench and the family in a Lviv apartment is the same. We are not abandoning you to a forever war. We are building a credible path to a secure peace. This is essential for maintaining national morale. Without it, the slow erosion of public resolve becomes a national security threat far more dangerous than any Russian tank column. The Kremlin's strategy, conversely, has always been to wait out the West to outsuffer Ukraine. They are betting that our attention spans are short and that Ukrainian resilience has an expiration date. The new Western strategy is a direct counter to this. It's saying, we will not wait for your spirit to break. We will create a structure that sustains it. This is where the narrative of victory becomes paramount. For any negotiation to be acceptable in Ukraine, it cannot be framed as a compromise. It must be framed as the achievement of a core national objective, the preservation of Ukrainian statehood and its irreversible path toward Europe. The government in Kiev is now tasked with the monumental challenge of selling this new complex phase to its people. They must convince them that pausing the active fighting along the current lines is not a defeat, but a strategic consolidation, that entering talks is not surrender, but the continuation of the war by other, more potent means. They must show that the frozen Russian assets will become the foundation for a new rebuilt Ukraine, and that the security guarantees are a permanent anchor in the West. This is a battle of perception as crucial as the battle for Bakhmut. If the Ukrainian public sees this as a betrayal, the entire strategy collapses from within. The incredible national unity that has defined Ukraine's response so far will fracture. This is the immense pressure on President Zelensky. He must be both a war leader and a peace architect, navigating the treacherous waters of domestic politics while his country is still under fire. And let's be clear, the fighting hasn't stopped. While diplomats talk, soldiers die. This is the brutal paradox of negotiating while a war rages. Every day that passes without a ceasefire, the line of contact shifts slightly, the casualty lists grow, and the facts on the ground change. This creates a race against time. The West and Ukraine are racing to lock in a framework that maximizes their leverage, while Russia is racing to create new, more favorable facts through military action. The recent Russian offensive pushes in the Kharkiv region are a perfect example of this. They are not just military operations, they are negotiating tactics, they are an attempt to shift the line of contact before it becomes the official baseline for talks, to capture more land and then say, this is the new reality. This is why the Western statement was so urgent. It was an attempt to freeze the diplomatic landscape even if the military landscape remains fluid. It's a message to Moscow. We see what you're doing, and we will not let you negotiate with a gun to Ukraine's head. We are defining the terms, not you. So, as we look at the week ahead with high-level meetings in Brussels and London, watch for one thing above all else, the language. Listen to how leaders talk about the future of Ukraine. Are they speaking about a temporary ceasefire or a durable peace? Are they discussing aid packages for the next 6 months or security commitments for the next decade? The words they choose will reveal whether this is a tactical pause or a genuine strategic pivot. The evidence so far suggests it's the latter. The commitment to utilize Russia's immobilized assets is a generational decision. The planning for long-term security guarantees is a historic commitment. These are not the actions of a coalition looking for an exit. They are the actions of a coalition digging in for a long-term contest, but one they intend to win through economic and diplomatic dominance, reducing the need for daily frontline bloodshed. In the end, this is the final lesson from this brutal war.